Good evening to everyone joining in India and good morning to those joining in the US. My name is Rukmini S. and it is a privilege to welcome you to the 10th monthly CASI Data Seminar series. I'm a bit unreasonably excited about the fact that we've got to the 10th seminar in this series. So if you have, maybe this is more appropriate for those joining in the US. I would hope nobody's sitting with a glass of wine at 9 a.m. in the 10 a.m. in the US. But if you are, please, join me in raising a toast to the CASI team that's allowed us to get to the 10th in this increasingly exciting and fun series. The Center for the Advanced Study of India, CASI, at the University of Pennsylvania, is a unique research institution that aims to nurture a new generation of young scholars of contemporary India. I was a visiting scholar at this time last year, and I am now a non-resident fellow this year. My thanks to Tariq Tachil, CASI's wonderful director, for giving us this opportunity. The community of those working with data on India is wide, diverse, and vibrant. Over the last few years, advances in open data have allowed for a big leap in accessing and using data, and this seminar series hopes to push that frontier further. I am thrilled to be able to welcome today Nitin Kumar Bharti, a postdoctoral fellow at NYU Abu Dhabi, to talk about ways in which we can think about access and use data on inequality in India, particularly caste inequality. I have a small sort of backstory to getting in touch with Nitin, which is when Nitin was a master's student, he wrote a paper on inequality in India using some of the data sets that we'll talk about today. And I have, forwarded that paper to dozens of friends. I have used it in my work. And I think one of the reasons it was very accessible, and it's there. We'll be sharing it as one of the links afterwards. But I also sometimes there are issues that you think about, but operationalizing them into variables that you can actually work with seems like a bridge that's almost too far or too hard to cross. So I certainly felt instinctively that there should be things that we should be able to say about intercaste inequality in India, including generational inequality, but had struggled to figure out how to be able to say this from data, because lots of government data sets have very broad groupings from which there's not a lot that you're able to say. So I was absolutely thrilled to read that paper, and I've talked about it in multiple contexts over the years, including moments when there have been discussions about Muslim backwardness and discussions around a quota for Muslims, around the economically weaker section quota that came up, the EWS quota, discussions around that, around agitations for quotas for groups including Jats and Marathas and what that means. In multiple contexts, this has come up. And finally, just a sort of very recent discussion that this also ties into is the activity that's going around, both political and sort of social, around caste censuses in India. And one of the sort of very sort of live examples that we can see about what the universe of what we could potentially do with caste censuses and what states that intend to conduct their own should be thinking about comes at the intersection of caste information as well as well-asked questions around socioeconomic inequality. So there's a lot to learn from what the numbers already tell us, as well as to think about what future caste censuses could do better, perhaps, and could do right, at least to get us closer to the data that we've not had for this long. As always, please post your questions in the chat box, and at the end, I'll either ask you to unmute and ask it, or I'll aggregate and ask the questions if you don't want to unmute. As I said, thrilled to have Nitin here, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rukmini, for this amazing introduction. Let me start sharing my slides. And you tell me if everything is working, if you can see my slide properly. It's all good, right?
Yes, all good.
Okay. 1 second. Okay. So yeah, first of all, thank you to Rukmini for inviting me, and thank you for everyone who is here, who has taken out time for this presentation. I am going to talk about intergroup inequality in India, mainly from the perspective of what data is available and how one could use them for this kind of research. I am currently a postdoctoral fellow here at New York University, Abu Dhabi. I'm also coordinator for South and Southeast Asia at World Inequality Lab, which is based in Paris School of Economics. And because of that, I'm also going to talk a little bit about the World Inequality Database. Yeah, and I mean, I'm open to kind of discussing any topic towards the end of the presentation. Okay, so let me begin by a brief introduction, a very general introduction, that social structure around the world, they sort of determine the groups, and these groups provide a sense of identity to individuals. Now, these groups also set some norms and patterns in the society, which sort of determines the way people interact with each other, and especially at the group level. Over time, several of these norms and patterns, they have become rigid, hierarchical, and in extreme cases, hereditary in nature. And the examples you could think of from around the world are religion, caste, ethnicity, race. Now, no doubt, these structure or these groups, they have some function, they provide some positive things. However, especially the discrimination and exclusion towards other group, it limits the mixing and integration in the society, which restricts the socio-economic mobility and leads to intergenerational inequalities. And there are several studies around this highlighting these issues, especially in India. Now, since this topic, or like this talk is going to be about India, I'm going to talk about two groups, basically caste and religion in combination. And I'm going to argue that these groups are salient even in today's context. This does not mean that the other groups are not salient, for example, gender. However, I'm going to restrict myself to caste and religion groups. Now, we keep hearing about whether the caste in today's world, whether it's relevant or not, and especially when it, like most of such argument come from urban area where people are more vocal and you have more educated lot. And it might be true in their local bubble, but if we'll go by the data, a completely different picture emerges. Now, indeed, some forms of like discrimination and exclusions have changed. However, even the extreme forms, for example, the violence or untouchability has subsided, but it has not been completely eliminated. So here I put together a small collage from different newspapers post-2020, where you can see that there has been actually a physical violent attack from upper caste group on lower caste groups who are sort of violating some form of social norms. Okay. Now, like if we use the ISDS survey, there 43% of Brahmin, like the upper caste group, claim to have performed some form of untouchability. That is in 2005. If we go by the marriages within caste, like caste endogamy, that stands at 90 to 95%. That is, the intercaste marriages are as low as 5% even today. Caste in politics is uncontestable. Parties field their candidates based on the electoral share of the caste, and people actually, they vote based on the caste affiliation of the candidate. If we look at the occupation, for an average person, it's 3 times more likely that the person is going to be engaged in the occupation, which is traditionally or defined by the caste-based norms. So all this to say is that the caste still remains salient in India and hence should be studied. Okay, now a brief introduction of the caste system. There has been a lot of documents floating around and there's a lot of things which has been written down and so on. What I'm going to do, a very brief summary of trying to define the caste based on the terms which are often used. There are some overlaps to these terms, and that's why it tends to confuse people about like what exactly we are talking about. So the terms often used are, for example, like the first, let's call it caste, which is because the way post-independence the data has been captured, it actually means administrative caste groups. And if one thinks from the perspective of the identity it provides to individuals, it's kind of artificial. However, because it has been captured from last 60, 70 years, I would tend to think that this has also become salient in the society. And these broad 4 caste groups are scheduled tribe, scheduled caste, other backward caste or class, often termed OBCs, and general or forward caste group. Now, the traditional, or like what in the society where people are more like where they derive most of their identity from, is basically the jati, which is actually one could think of as a like subcaste. So there are actually more than 2,000, 3,000 jatis in India. And it's a complex combination of location, occupation, and several other things. Now, since there are so many in numbers, what people have done, or they have tried to sort of make sense of it through the Varnas. Now, Varnas they have their backing in the ancient scriptures, and these Varnas are 4 or 5 in numbers. So the one is the first one, Brahmin, which is clergy or priest group, then Kshatriya, which is the warrior class or warrior group, then third is Vaishya, or the merchant class, fourth is Shudra, or the laborers, and the final one, who are actually outcasts. So they are not even the four groups in the Varna, they are untouchables, and they are also called Dalits. Now, if I have to make a link, basically these untouchables or Dalits are the scheduled castes. So when we use the term SC, they are basically these untouchables. Okay, and the other backward castes, they basically mostly come from the Shudra, which is the 4th category caste, and the general or forward caste, when we use that term, that basically belongs to the top 3: clergy, warrior class, and merchant class. Okay. So even, let's say, if we are kind of aggregating these jatis into these varna, there are going to be thousands of jatis within each varna or within each caste group. Okay. Now, I have already talked about some of the defining features before while making a case for salience of the caste. There are some others for defining features of the caste group in India. One is the principle of gradation and rank. So basically what it says is that all the, let's say, 3,000 or 4,000 jatis, they have a ranking. Now, of course, because of the locational reason, in each region or in each small geographical region, you won't find all of them. So maybe in one village, maybe you can have like 20 different jatis, but those 20 jatis there is some sort of ranking to them. Now, of course, these ranking towards the bottom or towards the bottom, it's a bit fuzzy, but then there is a very clear ranking for who is at the top and who is at the bottom. It puts kind of similar restriction on women, similar to the Shudra, which is the 4th category of the Varna system, in terms of, for example, the gaining of religious knowledge and so on. There is a spatial variation in different norms, but some norms which has pan-India thing is like caste endogamy or like food accepting norms and so on. And even though like these castes, they have their origin in the Hindu religion, over time, it has intruded in other religions in India too. So it has become, it has not only remained a Hindu religion thing. Okay. And that's why I guess one of the reasons why I, and like many other people, tend to use a combination of caste and religion when they try to study intergroup inequality or poverty in India. Okay, now coming to the data sets which are often used to materialize these studies, there are 2 types of data. First is the census data sets. Now, census by name means it is going to capture the universe of population. Now, these census in pre-independence time period, so the first census occurred in 1871 and the last one in 1941. And during this pre-independence time, actually Britishers, they tried to capture Jati information, which are, again, to remind you, they are thousands in numbers. Now, their objective was to, of course, on one side, to understand the Indian society so that they can rule better. However, when the census threw up these big list of unique castes, they were also not able to sort of properly utilize it. Anyways, so the last actually census where Jati information was captured is 1931. In 1941, it was not captured because of monetary reason. It was war period. And post-independence, Indian government decided not to capture this because of the threat of making these Jatis more salient in the society. And that's why you will also hear about some works which say that the pre-independent census where Jatis was captured, it has sort of increased the salience of Jatis in the society. Now, in 2011, so after almost 60 years, the first time Jati was captured in the census in India. However, due to the several reasons, but mostly due to the politicization of the issue, the Jati information has not been released. Other information has been released. And Rukmini has already talked about Bihar 2020, recent release of some caste information in one of the state of India, Bihar, which is the second largest state. And I'll provide you some number where I think Chinmay from IIM, he has sort of compared the numbers in 1931 and in 2023. Okay, so these are the population census, these two. Now, the third one is basically economic census, which tries to capture the universe of economic establishment in India. And you have different rounds of this census, and they also capture the caste information. Now, when I am using the term caste, basically, I will always mean by these administrative caste groups, okay, those 4 or 5. The second set of data set, which is available, and many people, especially doing empirical study, use are surveys. Now, in the Indian context, there are, I have tried to categorize here into 3 groups. Now, one is basically like the surveys which are organized by NSSO, so National Sample Survey Office. And they have different types of surveys. So there are NSS consumption surveys, NSS employment and unemployment survey, which capture wages. There is All India Debt and Investment Survey, which captures wealth information. All of these surveys, they capture these caste groups, which is Scheduled SC, ST, Scheduled Caste, Scheduled Tribe, General, before 1999. And post 1999, all these surveys, they also started capturing the 4th caste category, which is other backward caste. Okay. Now, depending on the type of survey you are using, you will have a different welfare indicator. So if one is using NSS consumption, then the consumption is the prime focus of those surveys. And so if one is using that data set, then the welfare measure to look for is consumption, and so on. Now, the second set of survey is IHDS, Indian Human Development Survey, which is the only panel survey in India. So panel in the sense that same households are tracked in different time period. Most often, even though IHDS have 3 rounds, because of the data issues, only 2 are most often used, 2005 and 2011. It is also the only survey which captures income information. Okay. Now, again, in terms of the caste, it captures SC, ST, OBC, General. So because most of the, many times people use 2005 and 11, then the OBC caste group was already started getting captured. And so these 4 groups, but one extra thing it adds is that it further captures whether the person is Brahmin or not. So within general caste or within forward caste group, you have an identifier for Brahmin, which is if you remember, is the top or is the highest or is the most uppermost caste, basically. Okay. Now, these surveys, they also captured Jati information, but it requires cleaning. And so basically what has been done is that enumerators have just noted down the Jati information, but it has not cleaned by anyone till now. And now a new paper is coming, which is R&R in Econometrica, actually. It's called A Division of Laborers. And in this paper, authors have gone through, I think, I'm sure, like years of hard work to sort of clean these Jati information. And I think this is a paper, and hopefully when it gets published, the data will become public. And this is the data set to look for if one wants to do if one wants to do some sort of study using Jati information. Okay. Now, the third set of data set is Demography and Health Survey, or also called as National Family Health Survey. Both are same survey. For some time I was confused, are these two different surveys or not? But they are same survey named differently, with two different names in India. These are cross-sectional, and they are quite regular, starting from 1990s, as you can see, for different years in which they are conducted. And I think many people know about these surveys because it's not only in India, but DHS conducts surveys in several countries around the world, where the main objective is to capture health information. Now, what is unique about these surveys, at least in the last 2 rounds, is that it also provides you geo-coordinates information, not very precise, like because of hiding the identity, they disturb the exact geo-coordinates of the village, but it gives you the geo-coordinate information, which which could be used to geolocate the characteristics, right? Because now, since we are talking about surveys, these surveys are randomly drawn sample surveys. So it gives you a representative number at all India level. However, it does not allow you to go below a certain level of geographical category, right? Yeah, so you can maybe do something at the state level, or using DHS. Actually, it has larger sample size, so you could go at the district level, but then going below that is not possible in these surveys. Now, again, Jati was captured in the last 2 rounds, actually in last 3 rounds, so 2005, 15, and 19. But again, it has the same issue that the enumerators ask them, it is written down, but it is not clean. And the other important thing here to note is that over time, now men are also sampled. Before, only women were sampled in the surveys. But because men and women, they are interviewed separately, there is some people, I mean, actually, in one of my paper now I'm using is that I'm trying to actually, I use these different caste group, said by men and women, husband and wife, let's say, to look at the intercaste marriages. So this is one of the peculiarity of this survey as compared to other survey, where basically the information is gathered from the household head, and then all the members in the household are going to be assigned the same caste. And finally, all these census and surveys, they capture the major 6 religions of India. So you have the option to combine and look at, to combine caste and religion, okay? Right, now I've talked about the data. Now let me go to some numbers here. So the first thing to note is, what is the population share of these caste or religion, right? Because there has been some like these changes in terms of what to capture, what not to capture. And so here, in terms of religion, in 2011, which is the last census for which the data is out, Hindus formed 80% of the population, Muslim 14%, and other religion 6%. Compared to 1951, as you can see, there is 4 percentage point increase in the share of Muslims and a corresponding decline in Hindu share. Now, if we look at the caste groups, scheduled caste today forms 17% of the population. Scheduled tribe form 9% of the population. And OBC, it's not captured in census, but through surveys, it comes around 45% of the total population. Now, if you compare it with the 1951 census, there is a 2 percentage point gain in the SC population share and 3 percentage point gain in the scheduled tribe population share. Now, I just wanted to highlight this thing because there is often debate in Indian context about Muslim population growth and the increasing population share, but it's not the religion. It's basically because of the lower educational and economic background that you also see these increasing population share in SCs and STs, which is actually not, I mean, it's not talked about, or let's say it's not politicized, whereas the Muslim share is politicized. Okay, now if we look at if we try to compare the 1931 and 2023 population here, which is actually put together by Chinmay for some, so it's only for one state, and actually even in one state, he only looks at the 10 districts, which are exactly same as in 1931. So it's not like very hardcore, but it just gives you some preliminary number how the numbers have changed between 31 and 2023. So the top one is religion, in line with declining Hindu share, slight increase in the Muslim share. And in terms of the forward caste group, which is here, as you can see, Brahmin, Rajput, Kayas, Bhumiyar, there is a decline from 15.4 percentage point in 31 to 10.6 percentage point. Below that, so these are the other four are more like OBCs. Their population share has increased slightly as well. Then the extremely backward caste, their population share has increased as well. And these are basically the SCs or the Dalits, and you can see that their population share has also increased. So, I mean, there is this kind of, I mean, it has increased slightly, but not too much. But yes, I mean, here you can't say a lot about their natural growth or anything because it also includes, there's an issue of migration, and the migration usually, I mean, it has been shown that it's mostly from the upper caste, right? So, but still, it's an interesting piece of table. Okay, now let me briefly talk about some of the existing studies utilizing these data sets. So for example, so there are different ways to kind of structure this slide. And I was thinking, what is the best way? Like, for example, one could structure the existing studies based on the different methodology or based on the based on the choice of your welfare indicator, or based on large sample versus small sample, and so on. But given this talk was more about the data, I have structured it based on what data sets they actually use. So starting from the influential paper of Chuni Deshpande in 2001, it basically uses the DHS and NFHS data. The paper, so I have added link, and at some point I'll share these slides so you can actually look at the exact paper. But this paper was Caste at Birth: Redefining Disparity in India. It uses the DHS data, and it basically creates a measure called Caste Disparity Index, which is basically the difference between the SC and the general population, or ST and the general population. And the difference, because it comes out to be negative, where SC/STs have lower values for occupation, education, land holding, assets, and livestock, it's called Caste Disparity Index. And she shows that there is sort of lots of spatial variation in India and so on. Then many papers have used NSS datasets, and I mean, here these are just some examples. So this paper, which is by Kojima, it is called Caste and Tribe Inequality Evidence from India. They use NSS consumption dataset to show that first, indeed, like there is difference in the outcomes, so difference in consumption, or like caste disparity in terms of consumption. But if you try to divide it based on how much of it is coming from the endowments, that the lower caste groups, they have lower educational, lower education or lower land holdings, versus what is the rate of return to those endowments. And that rate of return in literature is often termed as discrimination. And this paper finds that it's like the disparity is basically half and half due to endowments and half due to the discrimination part. Then the second paper here by Madheshwaran and Thorat, this is like graded caste inequality and poverty paper. It uses NSS wage employment and unemployment data to look at the wage discrimination, and it finds approximately 30% of the wage disparity is because of this discrimination. This paper, Vakula Harnam and Jakarias, it's caste and wealth inequality in India, and this uses NSS wealth data to again show the wealth disparity by caste group, and it sort of does a decomposition where it finds that these broader caste groups, they explain 13% of the total wealth inequality in Indian context. Okay. So these are the papers using NSS. Then you have paper using IHDS. As I mentioned before, it captures income. So then, for example, this Bura 2005 paper, which is actually called Caste Inequality and Poverty in India, it again looks at the income wage gap between different caste group and tries to find what is the component of the discrimination. And it finds that 1/3 could be allocated to the discrimination, or like whenever I'm using the term discrimination, it's mostly like when the rate of return on the endowments is different. Okay. And so 1/3 comes from that. Then you have the next Desai and Dubey 2012 paper, which uses, so Bura paper actually uses 1993, IHDS 1993 data set, which actually very few studies have used. Then Desai and Dubey 2012 uses IHDS 2005 data, and again, it shows the same sort of persistence of caste disparities along all these like opportunity variables or outcome variables. Okay. Now, this paper by Iyer in 2013, it uses economic census data. It's called Caste and Entrepreneurship in India, and it uses 1990s, 98, 2005, and to look at what is the share of SC, ST. Basically, they find that there's underrepresentation of SCs, STs in the establishment ownership, and they find actually that there is only a slight decrease in these 15 years of time period. Okay, so there is disparity, and the gap is not reducing as one would like it to reduce. Okay, now moving to my own work, where I look, the paper is titled Wealth Inequality, Class and Caste in India from 1961 to 2012, where I assembled all these different data sets, which I have talked about, like IHDS, NFHS, NSS wealth data, which is All India Debt and Investment Survey, NSS consumption data. And based on caste and religion, I define these caste categories, or like you can call it group actually. And so the way I go about is that I give priority to these administrative caste groups. So if a person says he's SC, I assign it as SC irrespective of the religion, then ST, then OBC. Now, because I'm using IHDS here, it provides you Brahmins. So within forward caste, you have forward caste Brahmins. And then rest of the Hindus are forward caste rest of the Hindus. And then rest of Muslims, you can think of like these are, so rest of Muslims in the sense that Muslims who identify themselves as SC, ST, OBCs, they are already categorized in SC, ST, OBC. So in some sense, this Muslim term, these Muslims are basically like the forward caste Muslim. Doesn't, I mean, yeah, with some slight abuse of notation, but you can understand that these Muslims are not like the poorer Muslims, okay? And then others is basically all the rest of the religion. Now, if you use these groupings and look at the different welfare measure, what kind of patterns you observe is here. So you find a graded disparity. So here I'm using IHDS 2011 data for income. And as you can see, if you sort of rank them based on the average incomes in different groups, in different groups, you find that the scheduled tribes, they have approximately 70% of income compared to the overall income. Scheduled caste, they earn about 80%. Muslims, who are actually like the forward caste Muslims, their average income is 80%. In fact, OBCs have higher income, 90% of the overall. So they are close to the overall averages. And now if you go to the forward caste group in Hindus and other religion, you find that their average incomes are higher than the overall average. So for non-Brahmins, it's 1 point. So there is not much difference between Brahmins and non-Brahmins here in terms of income. And for others, like rest of other religions, their income is 2.4 times. The pattern and even these magnitude remains same even if you use NSS consumption data set. Now, if you use the education term, so here I show again the ranking, and here the education in years in the bracket, the numbers are basically how far you are from the overall average of India. And then you see basically like the pattern remains same, ST, SC, OBC, then non-Brahmin, then Brahmin. But then surprisingly, you find that Muslims are now even behind SC in terms of their average years of education. Okay. And now here the Brahmins, they have actually higher, so in terms of income, they were equally placed, at least in terms of averages with the non-Brahmin. But when you look at the years of education, they have higher years of education as compared to non-Brahmins by approximately 1 year. Now, as I mentioned before, if you remember that NFHS dataset also captures this Jati information. And so what I did was basically I used that Jati information and I tried to, through different ways, through crowdsourcing, asking friends and so on, sort of trying to categorize those Jatis only in the forward caste group in these groups, which makes sense in the sense of Rajputs are basically the warrior class. So if you remember that pyramid, this is the second after Brahmin, you have this warrior class, which today is actually Rajputs. Then Baniya, which is the Vaishya, so the third group, Brahmins are there, and Kayas is actually a small caste group. And then I look at their years of education. So here, these numbers are actually years of education. And as you can see that Kayas, actually this group, it has the highest average years of education at 12.3 years, Brahmins at 11.9 years, merchant class at 10.3 years, for rest of the forward caste groups, 9.2 years, and for Rajputs, or like the second, they are 9 years. Okay. Right. So now the next question is, because I was using all these different types of surveys, I wanted to look at whether these disparity along consumption, whether it's decreasing or not, whether it is closing down, whether the gap between the SESTs and others is it decreasing or not over time. So if you look at the NSS consumption data set, you find that in 1983, for which the first round of micro data set is available, SC's average consumption was 21% less than the overall consumption, which actually increased to 24% in 2009. And then if you look at the ST's average consumption, it was 29% lower than overall in 83, which slightly increased to 26% in 2009. So not so much. So the disparity is not closing down, at least in terms of consumption here, as we can see. Now, because this paper was actually about estimating the wealth inequality in India in long run, I was using NSS wealth data, and I looked at the along the wealth indicator, how does it look like? So again, the wealth gap or the wealth disparity between, so here the way I compute wealth gap is how much wealth is owned by a given caste group minus their population share in the population share in India. So basically, say if the population share of SC is 15%, and if they own 15%, then it means that there is no gap. But if it is negative, it means they own lesser than their population share, and so on. And so, I mean, it's a very simple measure, but I think what I want to highlight is that there is persistence in terms of this gap. And even though I just provide one number because they're like the gap, the difference in the gaps are not too big, but you can find in the table that STs, they own actually 5 percentage point less. Now, remember, like STs, they are just around 9% of the population. So 5 percentage point gap is too big. For scheduled tribes, sorry. And for the scheduled caste, SC, this gap is 10 percentage point. Because now their population share is 17%. So they own just 7% of the total wealth. For OBCs, it's minus 4 percentage point. For Muslim, again, for like forward caste Muslim, it's minus 2 percentage point. Now, of course, like if everything is negative here, the positive is for the forward caste or for an other religion. Okay. I also compute some other measures from literature like representation inequality. So looking at, basically the idea is was that if you sort of create, if you rank people based on their wealth and you sort of create wealth deciles, you try to look into each decile, what is the population share. What we find is that all these lower caste groups like SCs, STs, and even Muslims, they are heavily underrepresented in the top 50%. So I'm not talking about the top 10 or top 20%. It's like in top 50%, they're heavily underrepresented. OBCs are more or less equally represented based on their population share, but there is overrepresentation of forward caste in the top 50%. So you could, like literature, they use the term, actually, it's called ordinal polarization, in the sense that all the forward caste groups you will find in the higher wealth grouping, and all the kind of the lower caste group you'll find in the lower wealth grouping. And then I also look at inequality within each group, where I find that it's highest within the forward caste group, and where top 10% of the forward caste own 60%, and slowest within the scheduled caste. Okay. How am I doing time-wise, Rukmini?
Yeah, I was about to give you a
Yeah.
5-minute.
Already 5 minutes? Okay.
5 to 10 is good. 5 to 10 is fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll take 10.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So very briefly, I mean, people in literature has used some novel ways. For example, in India, names or like surnames, actually, they also are linked to the jatis. And so some papers have used these surnames to identify different things. So for example, this paper, Political Corruption in Road Construction, it looks at whether the tenders or like the contractor's surname is same as your elected representative, and then they find that actually when it's same, then more tenders are given to those contractors. There are now actually some algorithm. So this Nilabra algorithm, which I have used in one of the paper, it uses the name and it assigns with some probability religion, whether it's a Hindu, Muslim, and it works quite well with like less than 5% error rate. I just wanted to mention that this, like, people can use this. And then, yeah, there are some other things which people have used less, but all of this is coming from the paper, which I mentioned about like RNR and Econometrica. They have used these new data sets, which I think no one has used till now. So People of India project, which also gives kind of list of 2000 jatis and in which province they are with their occupation and so on. Then there are several historical data sets, for example, in 1901, where it provides hierarchy to 5 to 12 ordered categories by different provinces. Then there is a 1911 list where each jati is linked to the traditional occupation. So they are kind of using all of this to in their research. Okay. Now, okay, I move to talk about World Inequality Database in last 7-8 minutes. Now, as I mentioned, so basically this database is prepared by World Inequality Lab, which is kind of a contribution from like more than 100 researchers, where researchers usually tend to specialize in one or the other country, and they provide this data. So in this database, basically, the most important information we try to gather is, and that's also the headline number, is the share of income or wealth which is owned by the top 10% or top 1% of the population. So the main objective is to sort of provide these inequality estimates, where the inequality is measured through shares going to top 10% or top 1% of the population. It also provides other inequality measure like Gini and so on. However, this is the headline number usually in the reports. So how it is different from other form of like other statistics, in the sense that I think it's different because it uses all the available data sources. So like many people, they just use surveys. However, surveys are known to miss rich individuals. And again, many times these are consumption-led surveys. So what it does is it combines the survey information with some other data set, which is called, let's say, call it rich list. So for example, let's say if the task is to compute income inequality in India, then surveys can only give you, I don't know, let's say information about the bottom 90% of the population properly, or like it will be representative only till that extent. And then it uses the other data set. So in this case, it uses the income tax return statistics. So around the world, different countries, after the end of the financial year, they produces these kind of reports, which gives you information for different income brackets about the total number of returns or total number of individuals, people falling in that particular bracket, and what was their total income in that bracket. So we sort of combine these information with the surveys, depending on how good the survey is in a country. And there are actually kind of now novel methods to sort of find exactly that cutoff point where you can assume that the surveys are now underrepresenting the rich individuals. And then it combines these two data sets to sort of come up with the inequality number. Not only that, it sort of also takes a broader approach where it distributes the entire national income in the population. So it also combines the macro information and tries to reduce this macro micro mismatch. So what it gives is basically it provides a long run series of income and wealth inequality. These are annually updated, and the data is presented in the workable format. So they are in Stata or in R. So people have already, like a lot of people use it. There are actually reports. So till now, two World Inequality Report 2020 and 2022, which gives kind of a description at world level and for some country level as well. Now, just a small snapshot in 2021 for India. Here, like for example, average of the adult population in terms was $10,360 in terms of the total wealth. It should be like, yeah, total income, total wealth. The average wealth was $50,000 US dollars. Then in terms of the inequality, you can see if you compare the like top 10% earn 20 times more income than the bottom 50%. They own 55 times more wealth. Top 10% own 55 times more wealth than bottom 50%. In terms of the headline number, the top 10% population in India took away 57% of the total national income. And top 1% earn around 22% of the total income. Okay. In terms of wealth, these numbers are further higher, where top 10% own 63% of the total wealth, and top 1% own approximately 28 to 30% of the total wealth. Okay, and yeah, so I'm skipping these long run trends where different papers have actually looked into. In fact, I should show the wealth inequality from my paper actually. So this is the wealth inequality trend from my paper, where I estimated the wealth share in India from 1960 till 2018, for which the recent data is present. And as you can see, and I mean, the similar thing applies when you look at the income inequality figure as well, that post 1980s or 1990s, when Indian economy was going through the liberalization phase, there is an increasing level of inequality in India. Okay. If you are thinking about how big are these numbers, so for example, in terms of income inequality, when I say that top 10% own 57%, how is it with respect to other countries in the world? So here, some major countries, US, Canada in blue, Russia, China, Europe, you can see that the Indian numbers over the years, it has gone up very high. So the income inequality in India is now one of the highest in the world. And yeah, so let me conclude this by like the takeaway that the caste discrimination persists and the disparity is not closing down as fast as one would like to. In recent years, the development is very inequality enhancing, and there needs to be like more things to be done. And affirmative policies or like the reservation, they are helping in some extent, but it's not enough. Now, in terms of instruments of change in the society, you could think of like education, for example, where curriculum should directly target caste discrimination topics. The laws and policies should be implemented strictly. There should be informed debate and discussions rather than rhetorics. And for this, we indeed need statistics and we need measures. Otherwise, there's no point. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Nitin. We have a couple of questions and I'll pass to them in a minute. Maybe I should let others ask first. I have a whole bunch I wanted to ask as well. But Suraj, since you had a bunch of questions, I was wondering if you wanted to unmute and ask a couple of them.
Sure, Rukmini, thanks. Hi, Nitin. Thanks for that wide-ranging survey of data sources. I think one question was about just details of the historical data sets that you mentioned briefly. Where can one, if there is a link or if there is any information to follow up on. But my other question was about the scale or level at which inequality is measured, because it's possible that as we know, intra-country inequality can increase while inter-country inequality can reduce, and global inequality can go either way. I think it's been reducing. There has been some data. So depending upon the level at which you, right, or scale, I think is more commonly the term used. And it will apply in India to village versus taluk versus district versus and so on, right? So the trends can go in different ways. So how should one conceptually think of it? And it also applies to one of the things you mentioned in your slide about inter and intra-group inequality. So, right, about, I think, the privileged caste group inequality versus the oppressed caste group, something like that. So what are useful conceptual ways with the Indian context in mind to think about levels, because they can go in different directions, and inter. So it's a biggie, but just some thoughts on how to think about it. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So I can share my slides. We'll find links. There's no issue there. Now to think about your question is very valid. Like at what level should we think about it? So I think my understanding is that the inequality is actually a village level phenomena in India. So the probably the lowest administrative region you can think of. And one way, and if I remember correctly, there is actually a paper also, because in these surveys, even though you can't go at that level, but because these villages are randomly sampled, you can essentially compute village level inequality. It's not going to be perfect. And I think there is one paper which tries to do that. So it decomposes the inequality into within village and between village. And it finds that majority of the inequality is coming from within village, right? And so that's one answer. The second is, the thing is, because most of the so the only, I guess, the census thing is the socioeconomic caste census, and the information it captures is the land ownership. And because it's a census, you can actually go down at whatever level you want to, and you can sort of try to, one could compute measure at different level. I am doing it for one of my project for which I got restricted data for SECC, and there I am indeed computing the statistics at the village level. Now, again, the problem is you won't get all the welfare indicator, right? Like there, I only have land ownership, in fact, agricultural land ownership. So yeah, I would say that it's a very local level phenomena in India. Talking about intergroup, intragroup, it's a bit complex, and I don't know, if I can give a very intelligent answer as of now, but one thing I did mention about in the paper is I was trying to look this thing from the perspective of assortative matching in India. So one of the argument I proposed in the paper is that over time, there is increasing education assortativity in India. And now, because all the marriages, they happen within a group, right? Within a caste group. And imagine on top of that, if you are adding this increasing education assortativity, it will sort of increase the within caste or intra group inequality. And so that's why you see that there is kind of an increasing pattern of within each group inequality. And I only kind of gave a passing reference that one of the drivers could be this increasing education assortativity in the Indian context. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Nitin. I'm going to ask Ariel next to unmute and ask.
Hi. Really interesting. You said at the start there's sort of a lack of good administrative data on counts by caste. How are the surveys actually dealing with this? How is it weighted to be representative also at the caste level, or are you worried that maybe the surveys are not representative at these lower caste or at this upper caste because they're not capturing it all, being just representative of India or some state in India as a whole, but not at the caste level?
Right, that's a very good question. So indeed, like these surveys, they are not meant to capture caste demographics, and so they tend to, like if you, for example, the population share of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, which is captured in census as well as in surveys, they often tend to vary by 2 or 3 percentage points. So that's like, I mean, I would say, so that's why when I am computing the statistics, I am always sort of like, let's say if I'm computing wealth disparity by the population group, I'm using the population share present in the survey because it does tend to sort of differ a bit. But still, I wouldn't say like it's a completely off the charts. Huh? Like if SCs are 17%, maybe they are capturing 19%, or like, yeah, it changes by 1 or 2 percentage point, but not like 50%. So that's at least there. Like the ballpark number is correct in that sense.
Thanks.
So Nitin, I'm going to jump in with 2 questions. So my first question builds off Ariel's point as well as something that Suraj had put in the chat earlier, which is what is the possibility to think of? I know that you've mentioned that there is one upcoming paper, but surely this question of accurately codifying Jati cannot have gone into like an intractable problem zone. And this is a point that Suraj mentioned in the chat as well, which is that since we do know that there are groups of researchers who have had access to parts of the SECC, as well as the fact that we now know that other people are working on things, including algorithmic sorting, do you see any pathway towards resolving this to some extent, even if it involves like a coming together of various groups or some sort of almost crowdsourced effort to do this? Because it's now 12 years since the SECC, and surely this can't be something that, as an entire community, we're throwing our hands up about. That was one. And the other thing I wanted to quickly ask was, when Chinmay put out those numbers, to me, the lack of change was really staggering. And I suppose if you try and think about it, then it suggests 2 things. One is that intermarriage isn't happening, and migration is, to my mind, it seemed to point that migration is smaller or sort of less mixed than would be too. But I don't know. So I was just curious if your response to seeing those numbers was surprise at how little the relative shares had changed, because that was certainly something that stood out to me. So yeah, those are my 2 questions.
Okay, so let me first start with your second question. And here, this graph is actually taken from a book by Thomas Piketty, Capital and Ideology. And here he basically provides you the population share in actually the very long run from 1870 till 2010 for some caste groups, right? It's not for all the caste groups, but at least within the forward caste group, you have Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, at least the top 3, and you see, yes, there is kind of stableness in the population share in very, very long run. And so Chinmay's number, that was for one state where migration comes into picture and you have issue. Here, maybe I mean, like people moving out of India, I don't think it's going to, I mean, that's always there, but still, I think it will affect the numbers less here, and still you find that pattern. Now, I guess, I mean, that's what the number is telling, but I don't know what to say, why these numbers are tend to be so stable. Yeah. But I guess, yeah, maybe like the caste endogamy is the answer, right? Like if everything is at the
Right.
replacement level and the caste endogamy is there, then you would expect it to remain like that.
Right. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the
And
other one was on the Jati sorting, the data sorting question.
yeah, the Jati sorting, I would kind of wait for like that paper and their data to come out, which has cleaned this survey Jatis. Now, I know this SECC data is present with some people, but I think like there are restrictions from government in sort of doing anything with that. So people are not using it, like especially the Jati information. Other things, rest of the things you can use. I mean, even there is a website, secc.gov.in, which is providing a lot of information from that census, but not the Jati information. So I guess, I mean, I use these crowdsourcing, and even in my paper, like for these 3-4 caste groups, when I compared it with the 1901 and 1911 numbers, I also found it to be very close. Like Brahmins, for example, were approximately 5% of the population. Rajputs were 9% of the population, and so on. So they were pretty close also. So I think it can, like the crowdsourcing could be a way, even though I think it will be hard for that. I mean, hard for it to go through the researcher community. But I guess that's yeah. I guess that has some utility.
Sure, thanks for that. And I'm just going to quickly ask Sanjoy to unmute and ask his question, and we'll have that as our last question. We're just taking a couple extra minutes of your time, Nitin.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you, Nitin. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Yes, for that very comprehensive and a very confident presentation. I have a question, more a comment about the wealth inequality estimates. I assume they are from the AI DIS data, in which basically, if I remember correctly, well over 80%, somewhere around 85% of all wealth was derived from land. But the problem I found is that those estimates appear to be sort of plucked from thin air. The way the land values are estimated, sometimes based on the circle rates, but most often really not based on anything that is robust. In addition, what it misses is the enormous capitalization of land rents in urban India. It is quite possible that the wealth inequalities that we estimate, because of the poor estimate of land values and the missing top 5 to 10% of the urban landholders, it is severely underestimated in India, and that it is entirely possible that wealth inequality in India may be the highest in the world. Your comments, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you, Sanjay. No, you are absolutely right. It is an underestimate, and so this is a conservative number, I would say. And during master thesis, I did a very small experiment, and maybe I think it's like I never picked it up. Was sorry. So before I go there, one thing. So overall, in terms of wealth, land and building, so both of combined, it forms approximately 90%, and it has remained consistent. I mean, it has remained stable throughout the years. Land only is about 65%. But your point is actually valid. And so what I did during that time was, for some cities, I scraped some data from the website of these property websites where there is information on land value, which is kind of, I assume, to be the market rate. And I did it for only the metropolitan cities. So I think it was for 10 or 15 cities. And then using that market rate, I computed new kind of land price per square kilometer. And because these surveys, they provide you area in that region only for the urban area, when I changed the land valuation, my numbers gone up to 85%. Now, there were a lot of problems with that because I was only doing it for like small number of urban areas where actually the land prices are super high and so on. But yes, it does. Yeah, it went up to 85% at that time. So I guess if one does systematically, you are right, like the numbers will jump considerably. And so these numbers are conservative estimates. Now, over the years, yes, different rounds have captured the land values differently. However, I don't know what's the best thing to do. I mean, that is kind of, unless we introduce some other data set, which will require some other assumption, it will be it will be a kind of different paper, interesting one for sure. But here, at least one thing what I found was that the land value share remained constant. And so I thought maybe, okay, even though there is change in the way land values are captured, it is still telling something. It's not completely off the charts. So that's it.
Thanks, Nitin. Thanks for that. I'm going to keep the wrap up a bit quick since I see how much we've gone over time. Thanks very much for this. This was fantastic, and I'm since we will put the slides up on the events page as well, I'm sure a lot of the links from this will be very useful to people. We'll all be looking forward to some of the research that you mentioned as well, including the one on intercaste marriage, because that's certainly something that we observe in normal life as well. Thank you to everyone from the CASI team. Tariq was here but has had to just jump off. So thanks to everyone from the CASI team for helping out as usual. And thank you to all of the participants who stayed right through and asked some great questions. Many of you had written in asking for a webinar on education, and I'm very excited that our next webinar, which will be in November, is on education. So keep a lookout on the events page for the next one. Have a great evening. Have a great day. Thanks very much again, Nitin, and see you all at the next webinar.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone. Bye-bye.